there is no Bitcoin standard. So the time for you to worry is 50 years from now, when all the money in the world is Bitcoin, when Bitcoin is 450 trillion and it's worth, go figure, $50 million a coin, and then the currency of the country you live in is backed by Bitcoin, then you might see that what'll happen? The more likely thing is that currency, the whatever yo-yo dollar, will be pegged to Bitcoin, and then someone will take over the government and said, hey, we're going off the Bitcoin standard. But they're not going to get rid of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is poised for a dramatic rise, with a staggering price prediction of $5 million on the horizon. This bold forecast comes from Michael Saylor, the executive chairman of MicroStrategy. In a recent interview, he shared his highly bullish outlook, asserting that Bitcoin could reach this remarkable figure sooner than many expect. As the global money supply continues to expand, and with more investors recognizing Bitcoin's limited supply of 21 million coins, the demand is set to skyrocket. Saylor believes that Bitcoin's decentralized nature positions it as the ultimate hedge against inflation and economic instability. He views Bitcoin not just as another asset but as the future of digital gold, capable of surpassing traditional investments in the coming years. Stay tuned until the end of the video, as Michael Saylor also unveils his short-term price predictions for Bitcoin following this election.
Stop. You don't have time. Don't miss out this 2025 bull run. Educate yourself first ahead of the crowd. We have created the ultimate step-by-step crypto cheat guide that will guide you this bull run. Unlock the secrets of crypto and make smarter investments today. Now by clicking on the link below to get your exclusive copy just under $10.
Gold may be regulated, but it's also worth like $15 trillion, and Bitcoin is worth $1.3 trillion. So if we end up with the failure of gold, Bitcoin 10x's from here. So in terms of being regulated, it is regulated, right? The IRS regulated in 2014 by saying it's property, you have to pay tax on it when you sell it. And it's regulated via these ETFs. So if you're an institution and by charter you have to own securities via a regulated custodian or via a regulated bank, you're buying FBTC or you're buying IBIT. Just like the SEC just approved options trading, but only on IBIT. So there are regulations. The regulations solved the issue of custody. They solved the issue of compliance. And that's why these spot Bitcoin ETFs are the most successful ETFs in the history of Wall Street, right? Billions of dollars is stampeding into those instruments. Oftentimes what's going on is the regulated instruments, like IBIT is one, but so is MSTR. They're basically regulated securities trading on high volume stock exchanges in the United States. There's a lot of liquidity, a lot of traditional capital that can trade those instruments. That's why they buy them, sell them, and trade them. And so yeah, no one's saying it's not going to be regulated. In fact, it's the opposite, which is as it's regulated, it's the green light for traditional money and institutional money to enter the asset class. Well, I mean, that was the question people had in 2013. I mean, in fact, I thought that in 2013. I tweeted about it. If the government was going to crush it, like the IRS, doesn't designate stolen property or counterfeit money as property, right? If you were counterfeiting stuff, the IRS wouldn't give you a designation of property. So we lurched towards something clearly being legitimized in 2014, and then between 2014 and 2020, it was a question mark. But then in 2018 or so, you started seeing options on CME trading on Bitcoin, if you recall, and so that was another endorsement. And then when Fidelity entered with Fidelity Digital Assets, that was a third endorsement. When dozens and dozens of public companies started buying Bitcoin and were approved by the SEC to buy the Bitcoin and list, that was a fourth endorsement. Then when you actually saw the last administration, you saw positive speeches and characterization of Bitcoin as a digital asset. In fact, Gary Gensler, Jerome Powell, Christine Lagarde, and Janet Yellen all acknowledged it to be a legitimate digital asset. They said Satoshi created something innovative and real. And by the way, they classified it as a speculative asset, but not as a currency. The real uncertainty around Bitcoin has been around its use as a digital currency, not as digital capital, right? If you're holding something and you want to do 10,000 transactions without any AML KYC at any size, now you're crossing over banking regulations and currency regulations, right? And that's highly controversial. But what's not controversial is whether institutions and individuals and corporations in the Western world can own property. So it's been acknowledged, like Berkshire Hathaway can own billions of dollars of Apple stock, right? Warren Buffett's not going to wire $1 billion of Apple stock to Africa without acknowledging that transaction publicly. So the use of Apple stock as currency would be controversial, but the use of Apple stock as property or capital, not so controversial. And so when you think of Bitcoin as, I own a building, right? Am I allowed to own a building? Well, the truth is you can own a building in China as well as in the United States or Europe. You know where you can't own a building? Cuba or North Korea. So where it's illegal to own property, then Bitcoin is in a regulatory gray zone for sure. But where it's legal to own property, you're going to be able to own it. And I think we've crossed that chasm between 2020 and 2024. It's quite obvious, right? If BlackRock is handling the asset, if there's 100 public companies handling the asset, if the SEC is approving options trading on the asset, and if the CME trades commodity options approved by the CFTC, it's pretty obvious that the asset has been adopted and is supported by the regulators. So I think we're past that question. There is no Bitcoin standard. So the time for you to worry is 50 years from now, when all the money in the world is Bitcoin, when Bitcoin is 450 trillion and it's worth, go figure, $50 million a coin, and then the currency of the country you live in is backed by Bitcoin, then you might see that what'll happen? The more likely thing is that currency, the whatever yo-yo dollar, will be pegged to Bitcoin, and then someone will take over the government and said, hey, we're going off the Bitcoin standard. But they're not going to get rid of Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's going to be a beneficiary of whatever happens November 5th, because after November 5th, there'll be more regulatory clarity about what happens next. And I think the results range from good to great, right? I think that there's a lot of other questions that'll be decided November 5th where there are good and bad outcomes, but because it's a very complicated situation. But I think with Bitcoin, time is on our side. I think that Bitcoin is again, it's a new digital capital asset. And after November 5th, we'll have clarity about it. So I think Bitcoin's going to be a winner no matter what. And if you were asking me for a good investment idea that benefits in the fourth quarter, I think Bitcoin is a beneficiary in the fourth quarter no matter what happens.
Economist Henrik Sberg has forecasted that Bitcoin could surpass $78,000 early this week. He believes that post-election market movements typically trigger strong price action, and Bitcoin is poised for a significant rise. However, Sberg cautions that the time to exit risk assets like Bitcoin and stocks may come sooner than expected. He points to signs that the Dow Jones is approaching its peak, with a potential 60% crash on the horizon. While short-term gains are possible, he sees the end of the current market cycle for Bitcoin approaching quickly. Sberg predicts Bitcoin's price could range between $115,000 and $123,000, based on Fibonacci levels and historical resistance trends. What are your thoughts on his analysis? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's continue with the video to hear more fascinating insights from Michael Saylor.
Bitcoin's the crypto asset that has unambiguous regulatory clarity and global consensus everywhere in the world as a commodity, as an asset, and it has the most certainty, not just in the crypto universe, right? In the financial universe. If you're looking out 100 years and you're buying Bitcoin, you want to buy 1/21 millionth of all the money on the network. And you want people to acknowledge that, oh, I just bought this because I want to hold one block out of 21 million blocks at Manhattan in cyberspace. And so think of Bitcoin as Manhattan in cyberspace. There's a lot of other places you can live. There's a lot of other cities than Manhattan. And there's a lot of other businesses I don't think that the liquidity or the capital that's being invested in meme coins is going to either drive the Bitcoin bull run, or it's threatening. It's kind of like, is Manhattan threatened by what goes on in Vegas? Not really. I mean, there are different things going on, and I think with regard to all the other crypto use cases, right? Whether it's a DeFi network or a digital currency network or a meme coin or an NFT or whatever, all those things, they're different applications. They meet the needs of different investors. They have different regulatory issues. Last week, MicroStrategy raised, $1 billion in a convertible bond issue. We put not quite half of it into Bitcoin. And then the week before, we raised more than $1 billion in equity we sold in the capital markets. And BlackRock has basically raised 20 billion plus and put it into Bitcoin via IBIT. That money is flowing from people with hundreds of trillions of dollars, and they're making the decision to buy some Bitcoin-backed instrument, or own a bond, or own a building, or own a portfolio of Magnificent Seven stocks. And so the thing that's going to drive Bitcoin is going to be traditional money held by institutions, high net worth individuals, and corporations. When Google has billions of dollars a month, and they either buy some bonds, or they buy their stock back, or they buy Bitcoin, right? They're just looking for capital preservation. So Bitcoin's very straightforward. These other things, right, they have their own thing, right? I will acknowledge people like all these other things, right? And they're all interesting. And let's say gambling. People like to gamble. And if you gamble on an Indian reservation, or you gamble in Vegas, maybe you make a lot of money and have a lot of fun. But if you do online gambling, it did get banned, and some guys got arrested for it because they crossed, a bright line. And so sometimes, some places you're allowed to do it, other places you're not allowed to do it. It would take a lot more than a few minutes to cover all the nuances of it. I think that you have to think very carefully about what kind of investor are you and what kind of investment are you making. Right now, what's clear is that there's regulatory support for public companies and institutions to hold Bitcoin. There isn't regulatory support or consensus for public companies or institutions to hold ETH. And that's above my pay grade. I don't make the rules. That's just what it is. But generally, it's well understood that if you have a public company and it's not listed, say, in the United States, you can't move the listing to the United States and get approval from the regulators to trade unless you're holding Bitcoin only. So the safe choice for a publicly traded company or for a large institutional investor is Bitcoin. I think all the other crypto assets fall into a gray zone, and there's a lot of questions to be answered about who can handle them and what their future is. And that's a really big if, but MicroStrategy wouldn't, because MicroStrategy is 150% Bitcoin. So I leave these other things. Look, they're gold miners and they do gold, and there are some people that do platinum and some people do palladium. We do Bitcoin, right? We're 150% Bitcoin. We're going to be Bitcoin. And the only thing I like more than Bitcoin is more Bitcoin. I mean, I think what's clear here is the Overton window is shifting. 4 years ago, the question was, is the government going to ban Bitcoin? And 4 years go by, and now the discussion is, how much Bitcoin should the government own or buy, and should they buy more, right? That's a major shift, right, for people that are paying attention. I'll note, right, what Senator Lummis said is we should accumulate a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What RFK said is I think we should acquire 4 million Bitcoin. And what Trump said was, we will not sell our Bitcoin. Okay, so if you look at the United States and say, what is it the United States won't sell? They won't sell their national parks. They won't sell their nuclear stockpiles. And they won't sell their Bitcoin. They would sell everything else. If they seized $1 billion of Apple stock or Microsoft or your building or your sports team or your Picassos or your Leonardo da Vinci's or your diamonds or your silver or your gold, they'd sell it. but you do not sell your Bitcoin. Why is that? Because Bitcoin is the most scarce, desirable property in the universe, right? It's global capital. And if you want it, why wouldn't you do it? Because it's the best thing to own forever. But why else wouldn't you do it? Because if people do stop using bonds or sovereign debt as a long-term treasury asset, what's the next best thing they're going to go to? Well, the logical next thing to go to is Bitcoin. And so the competitor to holding bonds as the global capital asset is Bitcoin. So the smartest thing you could do to support the US dollar is simply buy 20% of the thing that everybody might one day switch to before they get there. It's kind of like the US buying Louisiana territory or buying Alaska, or just, if you have Virginia and the Eastern colonies, you might as well get the rest of the nation, because if people go west, wouldn't you want to own the place they're going to go to? I mean, that was generally the idea, so Bitcoin represents the next financial frontier. You ought to buy it because it's a smart investment, but you should also just buy it because if people lose faith in all your other instruments, that's where they're going to go, and you might as well be there and put your flag there before they get there, because that way you win no matter what happens.
As Michael Saylor stated, Bitcoin is the world's most valuable digital asset, and its limited supply makes it an unparalleled investment for individuals, companies, and even governments. He highlights that, unlike other cryptocurrencies such as Ethereum, which remain in a regulatory gray area, Bitcoin enjoys clear regulatory backing for companies holding it. This is why MicroStrategy is fully committed to Bitcoin, seeing it not merely as an investment but as a cornerstone for future financial stability. Saylor even suggests that if the US wants to preserve its global financial dominance, it should strategically acquire Bitcoin to hedge against the declining confidence in traditional assets like bonds. For more Daily Dose Crypto news, check out these 2 awesome videos on your screen. Click now and we will see you on the next video.